Have you ever had that gut feeling that someone wasn't telling you the whole truth? Maybe it was something subtle, the way they looked away, the tone of their voice, or just that strange little pause before they answered your question. It's almost like your instincts were whispering, "Something's not right." And if you've lived long enough, as I know many of us have, you've probably learned to trust those instincts more often than not. The truth is, by the time we reach our 60s, we've seen a lot. We've raised families, worked hard, weathered heartbreak, and built wisdom the younger generation can only dream of. But even with all of that experience, spotting a lie can still trip us up. Why? Because some people are just that good at covering their tracks. Or maybe because we want to believe them, especially if they're someone we care about. Now, I'm not here to make anyone feel paranoid. This isn't about turning you into a detective who questions every word people say. It's about helping you protect yourself, your peace of mind, and yes, your heart. Because lies, no matter how small, can do real damage. And when you know what to look for, you're a lot less likely to be taken advantage of, especially in a world where trust sometimes feels harder to come by. So in this video, we're going to talk about 10 subtle but powerful signs someone might be lying to you. We're not talking about lie detectors or spy gadgets. Just everyday human behavior. Things you can spot with your own two eyes, in your own home, with your own people. Let's start with one of the most common and sneaky signs, evasiveness. You've probably seen this before. You ask someone a direct question. Something simple like, "Did you take care of that thing I asked you to?" And instead of answering straight, they dance around it. They say, "I think so," or "It's kind of complicated," or "I don't remember exactly." That's evasion. They're avoiding giving you a clear answer. Now, sure, sometimes people genuinely forget things, but when it becomes a pattern, when someone always seems fuzzy on details or gives you the runaround, that's a red flag. I remember a friend of mine, Evelyn, who lent her nephew some money to help him with a short-term emergency. When she followed up a few weeks later, all she got were vague answers. "I've got it handled," he'd say. Or, "It's just taking longer than expected." No receipts. No real explanations. Just vague promises. And in the end, he'd never had any intention of paying her back. She told me later, "You know, I knew it in my bones, but I didn't want to believe it." The second sign you should pay attention to is inconsistency. Liars often can't keep their stories straight. One day the story goes one way, the next day, the details change just enough to make you raise an eyebrow. This is especially true when people are making things up as they go. It's hard to remember every little lie they told you, so eventually things start to unravel. A gentleman I met at one of our community talks, Roger, a retired mail carrier, told me about a man who claimed to be a war veteran, collecting donations for wounded soldiers. Roger, being a veteran himself, started asking questions. At first, the man said he served in the Marines in 1982. Later, it became the Army in 1984. He couldn't remember the name of his unit or even which base he trained at. The more Roger asked, the more confused the man became. That inconsistency exposed him for what he was, a fraud trying to tug on people's heartstrings for money. So if someone's story shifts depending on when you ask or who's listening, don't ignore it. Your memory might not be as sharp as it once was, but your judgment, that's only grown stronger with time. Now here's something a little harder to notice, but very telling once you know about it. Simulated facial expressions. When someone is being genuine, their emotions show up in their face naturally. A real smile, for example, reaches the eyes, it softens the cheeks, creates those little crow's feet we've all earned with laughter and life. But when someone is faking it, their expressions can look stiff or forced, like they're putting on a mask. You might hear someone say something like, "Oh, I'm so happy for you," while their eyes stay cold or their face doesn't move at all. That's not joy. That's a performance. And the older we get, the more attuned we become to reading faces. Because we've had decades of practice. We've raised kids, worked with coworkers, dealt with doctors, nurses, bosses, you name it. We've read the truth between the lines 1,000 times before, even if we didn't have a name for it. One woman, Carol, told me she had a friend who would always greet her with a wide smile and a cheerful, "It's so good to see you." But Carol said something about it always felt off. Like the words and the energy didn't match. Later, she learned this so-called friend had been gossiping behind her back for years. And Carol said, "Looking back, I knew it. I just didn't want to believe someone could lie so easily with a smile." That brings us to another powerful sign. They can't tell their story backwards. This one's fascinating. When someone tells the truth, they're usually just recalling something they experienced. But when they're lying, they have to construct a story. And that takes mental effort. So if you suspect someone's not being honest, ask them to tell their story in reverse order. Not rudely, just calmly. What did you say right after that? And before that? You'd be surprised how quickly the cracks begin to show. My cousin once did this with a contractor who claimed to have completed a bunch of repairs on her home. When she started asking, "Wait, so you did the painting before the plumbing? And then what happened?" The guy got all flustered. It was clear he didn't remember what he said 5 minutes earlier, let alone yesterday. Turns out, he hadn't done half the work he was paid for. See, telling the truth is easy. It flows. But lies? They get tangled when you play them backward. And finally, let's talk about eye contact. Now, period. This one's a bit tricky, because not everyone avoids eye contact because they're lying. Some folks are just shy or nervous. But generally speaking, someone who struggles to meet your gaze might have something to hide. It's like they're afraid your eyes will see through them. I once heard a retired school principal, Mr. Duncan, talk about how he used to spot cheating students. He said, "The honest ones looked me in the eye. The guilty ones looked at their shoes." He wasn't always right, but more often than not, that simple observation told him all he needed to know. Of course, we're not trying to play judge and jury. But being aware of these subtle signs can help protect your peace, your finances, and even your relationships. You don't have to confront anyone or jump to conclusions. Sometimes, just knowing the truth for yourself is enough. So there you are, period. Sitting across from someone, maybe a friend or a family member, and you've noticed they won't quite meet your eyes. Their story is a little fuzzy, their smile doesn't quite reach their eyes, and your gut is sending up a quiet red flag. At our age, we've earned the right to trust those feelings. That little voice inside, it doesn't come from nowhere. It's built from decades of life, of people watching, of learning who's worth your trust and who maybe isn't. But let's keep going, because there are a few more subtle signs you can look for. Signs that become clearer once you know what they mean. And this next one? It's something that's caught many a liar off guard. They simply can't handle unexpected questions. Now think about it. When you're telling the truth, you don't need to prepare. You don't have to remember what you should say, you just speak from memory. But a liar? They've usually planned a story in their head. Maybe not all the details, but enough to get by. So when you throw in a curveball, a simple question they didn't expect, it often knocks them off balance. Imagine this. You're talking to someone who claims they spent the weekend out of town. You casually ask, "Oh, what did you eat for dinner Saturday night?" Or "What hotel did you stay at?" And suddenly, they're stammering. I think it was a, steak place?" Now, if they were really there, that kind of detail would come easily. But when it's made up, they need time to invent it. And that pause, that hesitation, that's your clue. I remember once my neighbor Gloria, sharp as a tack at 73, was helping her daughter find a reliable babysitter. One girl came by for an interview and claimed she had tons of experience. Gloria, in her usual polite way, smiled and asked, "What kinds of games do you usually play with toddlers when it's raining?" The poor girl froze. She mumbled something about cartoons and quickly changed the subject. Gloria just smiled, thanked her, and knew right then that wasn't someone she'd trust with her grandbaby. Sometimes just one unexpected question is all it takes to reveal the cracks in a lie. Now, another one that's quite subtle but just as telling is something we call micro-expressions. Don't let the term scare you. It just means those fleeting facial expressions that flash across someone's face before they have time to control them. They're quick, sometimes lasting only a fraction of a second, but they can be very revealing. Let's say someone tells you they're happy for your success, or they're not upset about something you did. Their words sound right. Their tone might even seem warm, but for just a moment, you catch a flicker of something else. A flash of irritation, a forced smile, a tightening around the eyes. It's not always easy to spot, but when you do catch it, it can feel like catching a ghost. You know what you saw, even if they try to cover it up. It's not about being paranoid. It's about noticing when something doesn't sit quite right. Micro-expressions reveal the emotion before the lie kicks in. And the older we get, the more we rely on this kind of nonverbal truth. I often hear older folks say, "I can't tell you why, but something about them rubbed me the wrong way." That's intuition. That's wisdom. That's micro-expressions doing their thing. And if micro-expressions are tricky to spot, here's one that's a little easier. Blinking. You wouldn't think it tells you much, but it does. You see, when someone is under stress, especially the stress of lying, they tend to blink more rapidly. Their body is working overtime to manage the tension of keeping up a story. They may also blink less while speaking and then suddenly blink a lot after they finish a lie, almost like their body is releasing pressure. I remember a story from a fellow named Jerry, a retired accountant in Arizona. He was selling some of his collectibles online and met a buyer who seemed excited about a vintage coin. But when Jerry started talking price and condition, the buyer's blinking went into overdrive. Jerry said, it looked like he was trying to keep up with a story he hadn't finished writing in his head. When Jerry asked a few more questions, the buyer admitted he wasn't actually collecting. He was flipping items and had no idea about the coin's real value. Jerry ended the sale and kept the coin for someone more genuine. See, these signs aren't foolproof, but they're powerful when you notice them together. One or two on their own might be nothing. But when someone is blinking too much, avoiding your gaze, giving vague answers, and their stories don't add up, that's when you trust your gut. That's when you pay attention. Another thing I've noticed over the years, especially in social situations, is when someone's facial expression doesn't match their emotions. This one is subtle but important. You've probably seen it before. Someone says they're thrilled to be at an event, but their posture is closed off, their voice is flat, and their smile looks painted on. Or someone says they're fine when every inch of their body language says otherwise. Genuine emotion flows naturally. If someone's happy, you can feel it in the room. If they're sad, you can sense the shift in their voice. But when someone's face says one thing and their body says another, it can leave you feeling off balance. That's not you being overly sensitive, it's your intuition picking up on emotional disconnection. A woman I know, Betty, once shared a story about her new daughter-in-law. At a family dinner, the young woman gave her a gift and said, "I'm so excited to be part of this family." But the look in her eyes was distant, her voice cold. Betty said it was like watching someone read a script. Over time, Betty learned the relationship between her son and his wife wasn't as rosy as it seemed, and that first moment had told her all she needed to know. When words and body language don't match, pay attention. People can fake smiles, they can say the right things, but the body rarely lies. It's an old truth that's never gone out of style. And here's a little trick that may feel like it's from the detective's handbook, but I promise you it works just fine in your everyday life. It's something called playing devil's advocate. Now, you've probably used this without realizing it. It's when you act like you agree with someone just to see how they react. Let's say someone says, "I love hiking, I go every weekend." But something about their body language makes you doubt it. So you respond, period. "Oh, I used to hike too, but the bugs, the heat, I hated it. I could never get into it." Then wait and watch. If they truly love hiking, they'll probably jump in with a passionate defense. "Oh, but it's worth it, the peace, the views." But if they're lying, they may agree too quickly just to fit in. Yeah, it can be annoying, huh? It's a gentle way to test the waters without making anyone feel accused. And at our age, we've learned how to read those little slip-ups in tone, in agreement, in timing. You don't need confrontation. You just need contrast between what they say and how they react when you say the opposite. A man I met at a senior center, Dan, a former pastor, used this exact trick when interviewing volunteers. One woman claimed to love working with children. So Dan said, "That's great, but I imagine it can be exhausting too, right?" She replied, "Oh, absolutely. I prefer when they're quiet and don't need much attention." That told Dan everything he needed to know. He thanked her for her time and chose someone else for the role. It's not about tricking people. It's about gently revealing truth by observing how people react when their stories are tested. By now, you might be thinking, "Well, I've seen more than a few of these signs in people I've known." And you wouldn't be alone. The truth is, every one of us has likely been lied to at some point, whether it was something small and silly or something that left a real bruise, maybe even a scar. But the good news is, once you learn to recognize the signs, you're no longer walking blind. You're stepping forward with clarity and with confidence. There's one more sign I want to share with you, something that ties many of the others together. And that's when someone can't keep their emotions and their words in sync. It's a little different from just mismatched expressions. This goes deeper. It's when what they're saying doesn't align with what they're truly feeling, and even if you can't explain it, something about it just feels off. For example, let's say someone tells you they're proud of your accomplishments. Maybe you've started volunteering, picked up a new hobby, or lost some weight. But instead of celebration, their voice sounds flat, their posture closes in, and their words come out a little too rehearsed. "That's great," they say, but you can tell their heart's not in it. You see, genuine emotion moves the whole person. Tone, body, eyes, breath. A true compliment has a certain warmth to it. And when it's missing, you can feel the difference. That's not just emotion, it's your lifelong radar working exactly as it should. And let me tell you something you may need to hear. Your instincts are not old. They are wise. Too often, folks over 60 are told they're being too sensitive, too suspicious, or just reading too much into things. Don't let anyone make you question that beautiful built-in compass you've spent a lifetime developing. You've read people for decades. You've seen joy, pain, gratitude, jealousy. You know when something isn't right, even when no one else says it out loud. Now, before we wrap up, let's take a moment to look at the bigger picture. The truth is, someone who's lying to you might show just one of these signs, or several at once. But what really matters is your ability to pause, pay attention, and honor your gut feelings. You don't need to accuse anyone. You don't need to create a scene. Sometimes the greatest power comes from quiet awareness. If someone in your life keeps being vague, if they keep changing their story, if they squirm at a simple question or put on a performance instead of speaking from the heart, it's okay to take a step back. Protecting your peace, your finances, your emotions, it's not selfish. It's smart. And it's necessary. I've talked to so many seniors over the years who felt embarrassed for being misled. A woman in North Carolina told me she trusted a friend with a business deal that turned out to be a scam. A man in Oregon shared that his daughter's new boyfriend was lying to the whole family, and he didn't want to cause a rift by speaking up. I've heard these stories again and again, and each time it starts the same way. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. So if that's ever been you, please hear this from me now. It's never too late to trust yourself. It's never too late to learn. And it's never too late to protect what you've worked so hard for. Your trust, your dignity, your peace of mind. And when you do spot dishonesty, remember, you don't have to carry that weight. You don't have to fix other people's lies, and you don't need to make them understand. All you need to do is take a breath, step back, and decide what's best for you. That's not confrontation. That's wisdom in action. So let's take a moment and reflect. Have you ever caught someone lying? Not through what they said, but through what they didn't say? Through a flicker of hesitation, a crooked smile, or a story that just didn't sit right? I'd love to hear about it. In fact, I invite you to scroll down and leave a comment. Tell me your story. What tipped you off? What did your gut tell you? You never know who your experience might help. And if you found this video helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It tells YouTube this is something worth sharing with others. Maybe someone in your circle needs to hear this today. Maybe they're dealing with a tough situation, and these insights could be just the clarity they need. And of course, if you haven't already, I'd love to have you join our growing community here at Strong Elderly Life. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another video. We're here to empower you with tools, stories, and knowledge that keep you strong, sharp, and self-assured, because this chapter of life should be your most confident yet. Above all else, remember this: the truth has a way of showing itself. And so do lies, if you know where to look. You've got a lifetime of wisdom. Let it guide you. Let it protect you. And never doubt that you deserve honesty, respect, and peace in every relationship you have. Here's to living your best life at any age. Stay wise, stay kind, and most of all, stay true to you.